Photography. We're in part 2. We looked at blueprinting, and same thing as cyanotype. Now we're going to look at William Henry Fox Talbot, and we're going to look at a cyanotype on the left, a colotype on the left, and then a print on the right. So he starts to develop the negative processes in 1842, and he's figuring out how to make it so it's a negative instead of a positive, because positives, remember, can't be reproduced. It's the light and so on is projected onto glass or metal or paper, and it's trapped there, and that's it. It's one off. And so photography starts to develop where there are negatives, okay? So he learned how to do this, and this is our basis for black and white film processing that goes on for another 100 plus years after this time. So this is he discovered how to do this. I don't know that much about this particular process, but there were a lot of things being invented at that time. All right, so these are the basics of black and white, well, color as well, but black and white photography with the old-fashioned film. We don't use film in digital photography. Some darkrooms still exist, but we have these different baths that have to go on. It's kind of funny how the author has them floating, but anyway, it's like being in a room with a bunch of big metal sinks and sometimes plastic bins as well. And you have the developer sitting there and the stop and then the fix. So you put it in here first once you've exposed it over here, and then the stop makes it quit developing. Okay, so I'm going to back up over here. So film going into a camera looked like this. Not all film, but this is a general rule of thumb, black and white, and then later Kodachrome colored. Then it was kept in a light, when it was taken out in a dark room, no light whatsoever. You could have like a reddish light, and it wouldn't expose the film, it wouldn't affect it. But you would take this out. Sometimes photographers would use like a black velvet sort of a box that they can put their hands into, as opposed to an actual darkroom, depending on what their financial situation would be. Then you'd put it into this tube here so it wouldn't get exposed. Then we're going to pull this stuff out, and we're going to develop this as well. That's another chemical process. But at any rate, we're going to take the film. Once that film is developed, then we're going to put light through it, and it's going to come down here, and it's going to project on the piece of paper right here. Then we take the piece of paper out, we put it in the developer, then the stop, then the fix. Okay, developer enhances all the black and white and, to a degree, and it keeps going until you put in the stop, and then the fix stops it even further. So this particular piece is a Caffenol negative, and this instructor at, where was it, in upstate New York, I think it's at the, he's a professor of chemistry and material science. I want to say it's Rochester, because that's where Kodak film was from. So he develops some non-toxic, because all those chemicals were toxic that we just were talking about, Caffenol with caffeine, vitamin C. So I'm not that familiar with that technique either, but it's kind of interesting to think about. And then sort of toward the end of this time, this sort of photography wasn't done, went to digital. But at any rate, it was a less toxic way of doing things, but the idea of silver gelatin print, that's a different procedure or a different material, and it would really bring out the darks and lights. So our enlarger reverses the tones of a negative, projecting a positive onto light-sensitive paper. I'm going to go back and show that to you. This is the developer, okay, and that is the paper. And you could decide that this would be smaller piece of paper, and you would focus it in a different way. You could alternate what you wanted to do. A series of chemical solutions reveal the fix. Caffenol is an alternative to toxic chemicals. So we're going to look at an albumin print from 1865, Sarah Bernhardt. Now, what's interesting is she was a famous actress and she was a theater actress. We don't have movies yet. We're quite a long ways off. But she became quite famous because of the ability to distribute her photograph. And that has really changed the fame game, the way people are famous, photography, and putting our people's pictures into the newspaper and so on. But when you'd get a portrait like this done, when you wanted to sit for a painter, and that's what you would have had to have done, you'd have to do many sittings over many hours, many days, depending on the portrait artist, and it would be time-consuming and expensive. So once photography took hold in the mid-1800s, then everyone was getting their photos done that had meaning it was quite expensive at first. And this was exposed so in a very classical, minimal sort of drapery kind of way, because she was an actress and this was her not really in a role, just in a basic kind of way. So it was just increasing her celebrity, and this is a very straightforward, propless sort of, very few props, fabric and column, and just focusing on her face and her attention on the sitter. So she'd have to sit there for a minute solid, not really breathing, and then it would be done, as opposed to hours. Julia Margaret Cameron is another early photographer who takes subjects and leaves the softer focus or the softer textures. You look how crisp this is, has all these really nice textures in it. And this has a bit of a softer, dreamy quality, and parts are out of focus because she was trying to do some sort of imaginative, intuitive, showing the inner self or the emotion of the person or the child. In this, she makes her child like an angel of the nativity. Actually, I apologize, it's her niece. So she believed it could show the allegorical, poetic, and intuitive aspects of life and portraits of celebrities. She was related to the writer Virginia Woolf, so she had access to a lot of celebrities and took photos of them. Soft focus. Ansel Adams, totally different deal. Landscape, not portrait, although it's funny because this is in the portrait style upright paper. Back in grade school, we would say the hot dog. So these are just gorgeous, gorgeous tonal qualities, and this is what he's known for. He spent a lot of time. He would do a gelatin silver print. His setup was a very large frame, aperture, a big plate, like he would have larger than that tiny little piece of film. He would have a big negative to work with to make his prints. He did a lot of nature studies. This is Death Valley. He did Yosemite, Santa Fe, all through the Southwest and California. And he was a big supporter of Sierra Club, so he felt connected to what they were doing and preserving the national parks. And this was his personal passion. And you see it displayed here just so elegantly. Look at that line quality on that dune. Oh, yummy. So he preferred it to show the entire image in clear focus. I mean, of course, you have your atmospheric perspective. Things fade away a little bit, but you do have an awful lot of detail and clear focus. Black, white, and gray tones to achieve a balance effect. That's what he's known for. He would just sit, stare at the sand, wait, take his time, hike in mainly. That's the main thing I should say. Hours, days, just have this giant camera on his back as a backpack and sit out there and wait. Weston, well, you'll have to look at the Pepper number 30, but it's really about form and the gorgeous tonal qualities of black and white. So in living color, we start to get into colored photographs in the mid-century of the 1900s. And prior to that, we could only do things such as tint them with paint, which happened watercolor and so on. So we're going to look at autochromes, chromogenic or C prints, sebachrome or ilfochrome. I don't know if you really need to know half of this complicated information because I'm a fan and a collector of photography, and these sort of situations don't come up very often. These are really oddball, small things in terms of numbers of things made in this way. This is an Autochrome 1912. This is the beginning of color photography. And he has sharp contrast, areas of atmospheric blur, and areas where the colors pop. Later we get into a Cibachrome. I've always hated this photo. Don't ask me why, but I just hate it with a passion. But this is a pose, sort of an installation, if you will, and then it's photographed. But the photographs and the prep for it, this gets complicated where you could call this person an installation artist or a sculptor making all these crazy cats, what have you. They're very lifelike, by the way, which I'm very impressed by. But, and I believe these are real figures, just people posing in this gray tone so that the colors of the green really pop and this whole idea of the radioactive material is there. But it is a photograph because these are basically highly staged photographs as opposed to installations. People are not walking into this space in this case. These are photographs that she spends a ton of time, or he spends a ton of time setting up. Okay, we'll get into photojournalism next.